there's a particular way I paint that always gives me peace and that deep joy that I've learned to seek almost unconsciously. I painted this recently and made it into one of those cute but not terribly educational shorts. And I realized quickly that I needed to teach this one out, and soon. I love it when watercolor does curious things. And this style epitomizes how goofily wonderful the medium can be. Today, you'll learn 3 ways to use watercolor to produce a really enjoyable bouquet and release all the curiosity of this magical medium. Number 1, we're going to release some opacity. Number 2, wet on dry to immediately on wet. And number 3, just speed. We're going to paint fast. Today I'm using Academy watercolor paper, a 1/2-inch dagger, and my Art for Joy's Sake watercolor palette. Something to note, if you don't have something more opaque in your palette, you might want to grab a white gouache or a white watercolor from another set so you can mix in that white into some of your existing colors to get more opacity. All right, let's get into it. Now, at times this might feel like it's going fast, but I will repeat some of these steps as we go. You're going to start with the ivory from my palette. If you don't have ivory, just mix a lot of white into a little bit of brown. Press and lift different sizes, and you're going to kind of see how I am using my brush very quickly. Let's look at that again, because this approach is kind of the core of how we're going to create these easy breezy flowers. Now I want to note, my paper is dry, so this is wet paint on dry paper. So you're press and lifting, and you're giving a little bit of a drag. You almost can't even tell that there's a drag when watching it on screen, but there is. And then around that first mark that you make, you're going to do some just taps, press and lift, maybe a little bit more of a harder press on the other side. And then underneath, you're going to do a horizontal press, drag, and lift. And this is going to give you the base for your very loose watercolor flower. Let's keep moving on. And honestly, friends, it just occurred to me that you really probably want to just watch this all the way through first and then attempt a paint along, because like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm going fast. All right, grab a little bit more of that ivory with some pink, press, drag, lift, press and lift, same approach, just a little bit of a different personality every time you touch the paper. One thing to notice here in the last 2 flowers, I was twisting the brush ever so slightly between my thumb and my pointer finger. And I'm also adding more pink as I go, but not reloading water. And that is what's giving me different textures on the page. That's what's allowing me to go from that really strong coverage from that very first stroke down to more sheer coverage. Now go into your pink or red, whatever you love, and tap in around the center, right where the paint of the petals meets the blank area of that center of each flower. Now I want you to mix up a green that you love, or just pull from a green straight from the pan that doesn't require mixing that you love. It doesn't matter which, you do you, boo, okay? But you're gonna get about 50% paint, 50% water on the brush, and we're gonna paint some leaves. Press, drag, lift. Press, drag, and lift twice over. Let one of those press, drag, and lifts go longer to give that leaf a little more of an interesting shape. Let's take a look at this again. First time, press, drag, and lift. Second time, press, drag, and lift longer. That was just a press and lift for a suggestion of a vine. And then a single press, drag, and lift that's kind of got the curve on the upside of the composition. And that's it. And then another press and lift for a little bit more vine. Now, you may not feel like you need to reload paint and water. If you feel like you've got enough on your brush, keep going. Keep going until that paint runs out. Heading up to the top, press and lift twice over. The same idea, one stroke longer than the other. Now notice how I'm creating stems with just the tip of my brush. Not worrying if those stems bump into the wet flowers a little bit. Let's take a look at this again. Now, before we do, I actually want to give you a peek at what this area looked like dry, because some of the magical moments are being created right now while you're painting. And if you don't understand how they end up when they're dry, you might be inclined to fuss with things too much at this point. It's important to point out that once this area is dry that we're currently painting, And notice here on the screen, I didn't really do anything to those original flowers beyond adding some wispy moments over top once they were dry. So what we've been painting the last few moments and just leaving alone has created this finished product dry. Look at all the magical stuff. Yes, you can see on the far right middle, really opaque first few strokes, but you can see as I let my paintbrush run out of paint and water, the same opaque watercolor paint that I was using became more sheer and lovely. And oh my gosh, some of the greens from those leaves we've just put down are blending into those flowers. And look what happened when they dried. You're looking just left of center right now. Look at that. Look at that flower. So this is what you have to look forward to when you just let things be sometimes. Let them go. Don't fuss with them. Let's keep painting. Slowing things down, press, drag, and lift twice. One side is longer than the other. If you're not getting a point on the end of your leaves, you're not dragging and lifting slow enough. And then that last leaf, I didn't add any more water or paint. I just let the brush wiggle in between my fingers, did a little bit of wavy action as I was dragging, and then did an extra long drag and lift at the end to get that skinnier, longer point. Now, those wispy moments that I'm adding with just the tip of this dagger brush that are becoming my stems, they take some practice. So you might want to work some out on a scrap piece of paper and really get your hand loosened up for that one. All I can say is this: super, super light pressure, and make sure you have not too much water on your brush, but definitely enough. And you might be like, okay, Christy, well, how do I know? If you're not getting those fine lines, super skinny, you've probably not got the perfect amount of water on your brush. So just try again until yours look like mine, and just make a mental note of how much water you have on your brush at that time. Okay, just using what's on the brush already. Keep adding more leaves, press, drag, and lift. At this point, start to bring in some other variations of green. I added a little fluorescent. I'm going back over that long leaf on the left-hand side, make it a little bit thicker. You can edit like that, perfectly fine. You want to bump into some areas, meaning leaves into flowers, ever so slightly, but not everywhere, because you're going to get some really cool bleeding and blends if you do that. Let me show you how. Okay, we're back to the dry finished piece. I want you to look at that leaf that's just right of center of that main flower. It's got a lot of linear detail on it, but if you look closely, you can see that it's not just a green leaf underneath. There is a little bit of pink on that bottom curve, and that pink was made because I bumped into the pink flower to its left early on in the painting, just slightly, and let the pink bleed into the green. And then I let it go and let it dry before I added the detail on top. So good. Get in the habit of trying to do those intentional bumps, and magic will ensue. This is that kind of goofy, wonderful magic that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. And if you're here for it and you love goofy watercolor magic and you're enjoying this video, would you go ahead and give this video a boop? That's a like, friends, and it really helps out my channel and helps others find this type of educational content. Going back into the centers here with the green that I love, it's like an olive green. Things are dry enough with those original flowers that the blending and bleeding that's happening isn't too crazy. If yours is starting to explode too much, blot that center out and let it dry a little bit more. Little bit of that pink on my brush, double dipped on the tip of the brush with red. Let's see that again, just so we understand how to make these marks. You do the double dip, mostly pink, and then a little bit of red on the tip of that dagger brush, and then you're gonna press with kind of a side swipe. Press and swipe, press and swipe. As you're doing that little shift or swipe to the side, you're gonna lift straight up. That's gonna give you really interesting berry-like shapes. And because of the double dip, they already have a shadow built in. Now, you're gonna want to make sure you press harder in some of these and then press lighter on others. That way you have different sizes of your quote unquote berries. Not rinsing my brush, but adding a little blue and a little brown. And I'm going to use the very tip and add some stems. Now you want these stems to be super thin. You also want to be aware that when you bump into the berries, they're going to blend a little bit, but we want that. That gives such a beautiful look. Continue on with the same type of light stroke into your leaves now. They are pretty damp still, especially if you're using the same paper as I am. So you're going to see those lines quickly diffuse into more of a shadow. And continue to build up that darker green in areas where you feel like you want a little more depth. I'm not covering most of the leaves entirely. I'm just doing like half or a little bit on a tip. And that way it almost looks like some of these leaves are folded. Now I rinse my brush, heavy application of peach and fuchsia double loaded. And you're gonna create the same type of flower, but larger. So what's gonna be different about the technique here is that you're probably gonna need 2 strokes to make the larger of the petals featured in this flower. That's really the only difference. And then I immediately added in some strong brown into the center and let it blend. Taking that same brown on the tip of my brush, still haven't rinsed it, and I'm adding little dots to those berries. If your berries are more wet than mine and things explode too much, again, blot, get out of there, let it dry, and come back. Adding a little bit of the green mix back into my dirty brown brush and adding a few more thin, wispy stems. I am mixing up a green. The green is primarily made up of what's already on my brush, and then this olive green straight from my palette next to the peach there. You see it on the left-hand side of the screen. Back to the paper, and we're gonna start adding in some more stems, again, with just the tip of the brush, and then right at the end there, a press, drag, and lift, a long drag twice. The same length though, they're gonna meet at a point there on the left-hand side of the screen. And then notice how I'm adding those stems. I'm going behind the big flower we just added and just being mindful not to bump into that flower right now at all, because I really like the color and what's going on right now in the flower, and I don't want to see green bleed into it. Just a few more leaves. Let's take a closer look at how I made those shapes. All right, here we go. Press, drag, and lift. That's an upstroke, another upstroke. And I filled it in a little bit with that dry brush, happened because it just didn't feel good to me. But maybe you like the dry brush at that point in your painting, and it's all good. Now, time to rinse that brush because we are loading up with that creamy pink. Remember, if you don't have these pre-mixed colors in your palette, you can take a white and add that to a little bit of red or a little bit of orange to make like a creamy pink and a creamy peach. I'm gonna add a few more press and lift, a cluster of, I don't want to say berries because these definitely don't look as round as before. And then we're going to add green to our dirty brush and add a few more stems and a few more press, drag, and lift leaves. You get to decide here. Maybe you're following along directly with me. That's cool, but you decide exactly where you want to place them. Now let's take a look at the piece dried. And you've probably noticed that the dried piece has some more linear details added. And this was something that I just did after I filmed the tutorial, and I just had some fun with it. But friends, look at what we were able to create by being open to number 1, opacity, number 2, to understanding starting wet on dry and then how that turns into wet on wet, and number 3, painting quickly and painting with some confidence in our brush and what it can do. Now, if you want to learn how to add these linear details, you've got to watch this video right now so that you can add them to what you just painted. Happy painting!